All right. Good morning, folks. Sorry about that little technology glitch this morning. Got quite a few of you online. I do not have you visible to me. So if you want to speak, please jump in and say something. We are going to discuss a bunch of contract and helpful clauses that we can go over. If you have not seen this document, it is actually on every couple of Sunday newsletters, we add this document, and I have to make sure my office staff has the latest version. Leah, our managing broker out of our Goodyear office, has created a ton of content for us. I've added a couple of things myself at the end, but let's start with, and I'm not going to go into detail here. If we have time at the end, I will come back to these. But if you guys did not know, there is an additional clause addendum. There are already clauses that have been written by the Arizona Association of Realtors to help you. And here's just the basic clause. If you guys have not seen this, boy, I highly recommend you go read it. I'm not sure how often Title gets it, but there are a lot of clauses in here that people use quite a bit. The basic language is the following additional terms and conditions are hereby included as part of the contract. So, but I'm just going to give you the titles here of all the different clauses that are added here. Again, I'm not sure we will get through the almost 3 pages that Leah has created for us. So I just want you to be aware these are there. Backup contract contingent upon cancellation of a prior contract. If you are ever being told, oh yeah, no problem, you're in backup. If you do not have this addendum in there, you are not in backup. You are in some type of quasi holding pattern that means nothing. You need that backup contract contingency language. A signature of an absent buyer spouse or co-buyer. So very important. If both parties aren't here, you need signatures. So you need to address that. If corporate relocation approval is required, sometimes people are moving and their company has to approve that transfer and the allocation of being able to purchase a property. Non-refundable earnest money. Oh my goodness. Should I put title? We'll wait till later on that one. Non-refundable earnest money is one of our biggest arguments for a variety of reasons. There is language here. Just a side note, please understand if you represent the buyer and or if you represent the seller and you allow non-refundable earnest money, you are shutting off your seller from suing for additional compensation. So please be aware there's a double-edged sword there, right? Because if they take the earnest money, that's all the earnest money they can get per the contract. And if in fact there's an argument, they don't have the ability to sue later for more. All right, let's look at some of these other ones. Appraisal contingency waiver. We have a series of 3 appraisal items. Appraisal contingency waiver, appraisal shortfall, and all cash sale appraisal contingency. For those that don't know, if you are doing an all cash purchase, there is no appraisal. However, if your buyer would like an appraisal, this is the contingency document you need to add in there, a phrase. Wholesaler status disclosure. How many of you have seen nominee or assignee? If you want to make sure that they are not a wholesaler, you need to add that status disclosure and or state that the seller has the right to approve any assignee or nominee. Tax deferred exchange. There is specific language that is needed in order to have a tax deferred exchange. That's the 1031 exchange. So please use that language. If there is a survey required, and then the last one has to do with water. Not an issue here in the desert, right? There are parts of the area that do need to have water clauses added to them. But let's get to Leah's contract and other helpful clauses. We're going to go over these. This is going to be interesting if I can see this here. So Response when client requests with post-closing issues. So here's the thing, folks, I'm going to read these. This is kind of the only way to understand what these phrases are. And then we can talk about when or if this would be useful to you. If anybody wants to comment online or in person, we can have a conversation about that. We have about 20 of these, I would say. So I'm going to try to go through as quickly as I can so you know all the different things that are out there. At the end, all of those from the additional clause addendum I have loaded on here. We don't get to them, I can do them on another day, but I just wanted to make sure I had them available if we got to them, okay? So, response when client requests help with a post-closing issue. I love this from Leah. How many of you know when your agency ends? Closing. Your agency is over. So please understand that once escrow closes, I am not permitted to advocate on your behalf. While I will gladly pass along your request to the other agent, it is deemed both a legal and ethical violation for me to solicit advice because I honestly don't know what recourse you may or may not have. If you haven't done so, I recommend seeking independent legal counsel. Please let me know if you need a referral for a good real estate attorney. I can provide them any transaction documentation that they may need to assist you. Please understand, right? Do you know how many calls I get? Oh my gosh, there's some leak in my client, blah, blah, blah. Let me start with, they are not your client anymore. The deal is over, right? This is a quote. This is from Leah. This is absolutely what every one of our brokers should be saying to you guys. And you need to hear it before you start answering all those questions or saying, oh my gosh, they should have done blah, 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 blah. Guess what you just did? You implicated yourself in a potential lawsuit because you no longer have agency. You no longer have E&O insurance, folks. Your agency is over. So thank you very much for the call. I cannot advocate for you. I'm not permitted to. My agency's over. I can pass your request on and button up. That's it. Okay. All right. Next one. That was pretty easy. Buyer contingency when not using the buyer contingency addendum, okay? So think about it. We have this new non-member form, and it does not have a buyer contingency. I think this was created to assist some of those folks, but this is here. If for some reason you're not using the actual full form, if you are doing something contingent upon for your buyer and you don't have anything in there that has a contingency, well, you've removed a potential relief for your buyer if their property doesn't sell, right? This contract is contingent upon closing of buyer's property located at blank, right? Wherever the address is. If the sale does not close escrow by this specific date, buyer has 3 days or blank days to waive this contingency by providing written notice to the seller, which shall include evidence of ability to obtain financing or pay cash and close escrow by close of escrow date. Or buyer shall provide written notice to seller that buyer elects to cancel this contract and all earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer, right? That's the whole purpose of having a contingency on the sale of a property. If buyer fails to timely deliver notice, seller may issue a cure notice to buyer as required by Section 7A of this contract. And in the event of buyer's breach, seller shall be entitled to earnest money pursuant to Section 7B of this contract. Upon request, buyer shall provide seller with a written update regarding the status of the sale of buyer's property. So if you notice that last sentence down there is not related to those others, I almost wish it was another paragraph, right? It means that with the contingency, the buyer has to provide evidence of what's going on when the seller says, hey, what's going on? You can't go, yeah, it's not your business. Yes, it is. So no, written update, not verbal, right? So you do need that. And just as a side note, I've had a lot of people ask me, when a property is, when a buyer is going contingent, what is the proof of funds? So if they're already under contract, proof of funds is an estimated settlement from our lovely title folks. Roberta's here, she's having fun. I'm teasing her over here, but title needs to provide something, even if it's a preliminary one, because they just went under contract. Why would that be important? Why would you need to see what potential proceeds are coming?
See what money they're gonna.
How much money are they getting, right? You don't know whether they're selling a $500,000 home and they've leveraged it to 400,000. They're only getting 100, but they're saying they're bringing 300,000 from the sale of the home. Where's the other 200,000 coming from? You need to ask. As sellers, you need to ask.
And in that case, the other 200 would be either proof of funds or
An-
pre-qual.
Another proof of funds or a pre-qual, right? But typically on contingencies, we're seeing, well, you can have a pre-qual, but boy, there should have been a pre-qual to begin with. If they were getting a loan for 200,000, that should have been a part of the offer, right? Roberta, how often are you asked for that preliminary settlement statement?
On occasion.
On occasion.
Not every time.
Okay, that's interesting. So that means, agents, you're not doing your job to make sure that you're getting that proof of funds. That's really the proof of funds, right? Otherwise, well, yeah, hey, I'm good for it. I have $1 million. You just know that I got $1 million. Really? Come on. Let's ask those things. Let's get that information for our clients. Do not know why this lovely thing. Hopefully you guys are not seeing that. Let's just move this out of the way down. Okay. Let's see what's next. Contingent on a HELOC or a refi. So let's talk about contingencies here again, right? So here we go. Does everybody know what HELOC means? That's a line of credit. I don't know what the home equity line of credit. Thank you. Blank on my mind there for just a second. Yeah, home equity line of credit or a refi. Why is that important? Right? Do banks ever change their mind? Right? Somebody's doing a HELOC and it doesn't go through, and you don't have this language in for your buyer. When they were contingent on that, they just said they were doing a cash transaction. You can't cancel, right? And get your earnest money back. You can cancel.
Yeah. And I rarely see the wording in the contract that the buyer's just doing a bridge loan. They don't communicate that.
Right. So if there's a bridge loan, if there's a HELOC or a refi of another property, so this contract is contingent upon buyer's refinancing of their property, put the address. Buyer has started the process and is attaching a conditional approval with this contract, right? It's a pre-qual, even though it's not what we're used to seeing. And buyer agrees to notify the seller immediately upon closing or denial of the refinance. And this notice shall be delivered no later than what date, right? Are you going to go right down to a day before closing? Are you going to go a couple of days out? How many days does it take to get that cash once it's technically closed? Does it get wired to title? How does that happen, right? Upon request from seller or listing agent, buyer shall provide seller with a written update. Again, here you go, written update regarding the status of the buyer's refinance. So again, if you're working with a buyer that's contingent on some alternative form of financing, help them out and protect them. Make sure you have that in there. All right.
You do still in the additional.
So you would put these in additional terms and conditions. And little tip, if you're ever typing a long paragraph like this, to check for typos, read it backwards, because otherwise our brain will skip over things because we already know what it says. So we will miss that there are words missing. If you read it backwards, you actually can check your spelling and make sure all your words are there. But yes, they are added to the additional terms and conditions to the contract. A reverse seller contingency. What happens if the seller needs to make sure that this deal goes through, or they can't close, they can't move forward, right? So this purchase contract shall be contingent upon, seller's offer for a new property. They need to find another property being accepted within 14 days of contract acceptance. If seller's offer is not accepted, buyer and seller agree to mutually cancel this contract with all earnest money being returned to the buyer. Buyer's inspection period shall begin upon written notice from the seller that this contingency has been fulfilled. So if the seller is in their home, they have not gone to look at a property because they didn't know when their home was going to go under contract, you can put this in for a seller to make sure they have an out if they can't find a property that they want in 14 days. Now, may or may not be an easy thing to get approved right now, but at least it's an option to protect your seller. We have a lot of sellers that don't want to go buy a property because then they feel like they won't be able to get their home sold in time to make the contingency work on their end. Okay. FIRPTA counter clause. We're going to put title on this one because this is a big one. So foreign sellers, we have a lot of them, right? So the buyer acknowledges that they will occupy the premises as their primary residence or have definite plans to reside at the property for at least 50% of the number of days the property is used by any person for the first 2 years following the date of closing. That is what is considered occupancy, 50% of the number of days, right? This is a counter clause because, well, can I ask you why it's important that there's a owner occupant?
Sure.
So let's put title on the spot. Well, here, I'm going to try distributing this and see if that works.
And I will tell you that FERPTA is my least favorite F word. So it's important that the buyer occupy for at least 50% over the next 2 years because it's how the taxes paid from seller's sales price are calculated. So if it's not going to be owner occupied, then it is a higher percentage, 15% rather than 10%, provided the sales price is under $1 million.
Now that's what I was going to ask. How much FIRPTA activity have you seen this last year?
I've had one.
You just had one. But you're seeing is
I'm hearing more people say that there's a lot of specifically Canadians.
right. And there's some guess that we will see more of that as we approach the fall and people decide that they're not coming back for the winter months. So this just gives you a counter clause. FIRPTA already applies in the contract, but it is an opportunity for you to help get through a deal like that. If you represent a buyer that is going to be living there, it relieves part of those costs to the seller. So they do like that. So that can be an advantage to you.
And that's wording that we also have signed in escrow.
You do,
That
okay.
exact wording.
Well, that's good to know.
And that's foreign investment reporting something.
Something.
Property tax addendum or something.
Act.
Act, got to have those acts coming from the federal government. Okay, escalation clauses. Now, there was a time when these were used all the time. I am still seeing them occasionally. For those of you that don't know, they're often used when you are in multiple offer situations. I have used them very successfully over my 28 years. I think that they can be used efficiently and help your buyer have more touches than just one. Because otherwise you are throwing a random dart at a specific number and that's it. This way it gives you a stepped increase that you can continue to be looked at. I can tell you some fun stories at another time about how they can be interesting. So especially when you have multiple buyers with escalation clauses, it gets kind of fun. Who's next tabbing? Okay, back, okay, up. It's kind of fun. Okay. In the event that seller receives multiple offers, buyer hereby agrees to pay X dollars over the net of any other bona fide offer received up to blank dollars. Seller to provide evidence of other offers to buyer upon contract acceptance. For the convenience of the lender and title company, both parties agree to sign an addendum with the final sales price within 24 hours of contract acceptance, okay? Because here's the problem, you're bouncing up. What is the final number you end up at? And it needs to be communicated. That's why that final sales price within the 24 hours. Now, can you leave, well, first of all, hereby agrees to pay X dollars. Highly recommend, don't just put $100, don't just put $200, don't put $1,000. Make it some random number, because the number of times I have seen $200, $200, $200, and you get 2 or 3 all with escalation clauses that are $200 over. It's like, okay, who's going to win out on this? It's like, okay, come on. Can we get some weird number that kind of throws the who's on top here? And by the way, literally once I had 3 offers, this is no joke. They were all written for like 10,000 over the list price and had all identical escalation clauses. I'm like, did they have a party here? We really literally had 3 offers that were almost identical. It was like, and literally they were all well over list price. So it was like, how did they even come up with that starting number? It was very bizarre. So please, the amount over, please choose some random number so you don't end up on something that's just all zeros. Now, can you not put a cap? Up to blank. Can you not put a cap there?
Would you want to do that?
I'm just asking.
Yes, you could.
Okay, so if there are, if one offer is $750,000 and the other is $750 or $740 plus $1,000 over your highest offer with no cap, what is that offer now? 751. Okay. Now there are some people that will tell you, oh, then the seller's just going to turn around and say, I want $900,000. I'm just going to counter you. Who cares? Right? You didn't give me a cap. Well, you can do that, but it's a counter. What can the buyer do? They don't have to accept it. Right? So I did have a scenario, and it's too long of a story right now, but where I did have somebody without a cap. They did win out. The rest of the story was the long part, but it is possible. I had to go back to them again later because of something that threw a curveball, but you do have the ability to not put a cap there. There would have to be an acceptance of that final amount, right? And you'd have to know if they qualify, if there's a loan or have the money to do it. So you can do it. Do I recommend it? Probably not for most buyers. I always used to tell my buyers in the midst of when we were doing these in 21 and 22, you need to play your own game. They were starting to panic. I can't buy a house. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to play this game. I'm like, you play your own game. If you ever play cards, right? You play to what you feel comfortable with. If you know you're comfortable with $755 or $755,000, great. Then do 750 with escalations up to 755, right? But don't leave that open-ended because they're not going to be comfortable with it. They have to be comfortable with whatever that is. My question to them is, if you found out this property sold for 756, are you going to be upset? And they need to just say, no, you know what? My top was 755 and I'm fine with that, right? But that's the conversation I recommend you have if you're going to go into an escalation situation, right? What are you comfortable with? All right. We got a lot more to go. So no repairs requested. So let's start with the fact, folks, the contract already says the property as is. It's already as is. That is written into the contract, right? So let's go ahead and look at what they're really looking for is being able to say that they want the inspection period, but they aren't going to ask for any repairs. So here you can use this. Inspections are for informational purposes only, and buyer will not ask seller to make any repairs. Buyer shall either accept or reject the premises on the BINSR prior to the expiration of their due diligence period, right? You still have your inspection period. You still have the right to cancel. And yes, you are allowed to say on the Binzer, items disapproved. You're not asking for repairs. You're stating items disapproving, and therefore you can cancel, right? Does that make sense? When people tell you what, tell them I want it as is. You're already getting it as is, folks, right? So do you mean that you don't want to ask for any repairs? Because the seller might be very happy to hear that, right? But it gives you the right to accept or cancel. Okay. See what's
What
next.
about if there's safety issues? I mean, would you add something about, you know, if the roof was collapsing, that you might ask?
Nope.
No, didn't matter.
There's no, so back in the day, folks, if you were a realtor back in 2009,
Mhm.
2000 and,
For recovery.
The crack.
well, no, yeah, I think it was probably not 9 through 14. I mean, there was a purchase contract that actually had certain things had to be in working order. There were like 5 areas that had to be what you're referring to as
Mhm.
safety issues, right? Electrical, plumbing. That's gone. The property is being sold as is. So if that's what your buyer wants to communicate, that they're not going to ask for repairs, then they aren't caring whether there's a safety issue or not.
Mm.
So, and by the way, hopefully you've already been to the property, so you already kind of know what it looks like. If a safety issue is a concern, then you're not writing this in the clause in there, okay? So drop dead performance clause against buyers instead of a cure notice for 2B. Okay, so let's see what this says. Failure to close escrow on blank date shall be deemed an immediate breach of contract by the buyer. No cure period shall be, notice or period shall be required, and earnest money shall be released to seller. So this is a drop dead performance clause. You need to perform by this date. You can't then be hidden behind, well, you failed to perform, now we're going to cure you. So if you have somebody that is stalling getting their contract written, that things are getting just dragged out and out and out, and you're like, enough, I'm not doing this anymore. Either you're closing by this date or this deal is canceled and I get your earnest money.
Would you maybe do something like this on an addendum when the buyers asked for an extension?
Yep. That's exactly when you'd use it. You would add this if they keep saying, well, I need another week, or I need this, there's something came up, you know, how do we address this? This way, your buyer is protected. I'm sorry, your seller is protected. Sure, instead of saying earnest money non-refundable, because they're like, oh no, I'm gonna perform. No, that's fine. You know what? Not a problem. You close by this date. If you don't, earnest money becomes the seller's. Okay.
Get the money with them.
Yep.
On that side.
Yep. If you're going to keep stretching things out. Yep. And this is a way to do it instead of saying earnest money to go hard or non-refundable or one of those things, right? So, okay. Handling multiple offers. Okay. Email to buyer's agents. So we often get this type of request, right? So what happens under a multiple offer situation? So here you go. Seller is in receipt of multiple offers at this time. Why is it important to let everybody know where you are?
Disclosure.
Disclosure. And the first person that sent in the offer, you didn't call them back to let them know you had multiple offers because they may not be aware of it, right? Seller is in receipt of multiple offers at this time. If your buyer wishes to make any modifications to their existing offer, please do so on an addendum, so they don't have to rewrite the whole thing, and submit it to me. This is your email, right? By a certain time tomorrow. Seller will sign the offer and the addendum for the buyer with whom they elect to proceed with the contract. It's elect to proceed. That's the end of that. So does that make sense? So, and again, when you're writing your listing, your ER, your listing contract, make sure you are checking, if you check the box that the seller says you have the right to communicate multiple offers, please have a conversation with your sellers on the rest of that paragraph, because it also says including terms and conditions. If you don't want the terms and conditions, either write it in your ER or have an email that says, all I want you to communicate is that I have multiple offers, right? I've seen some people that check the box not to communicate multiple offers, and I'm like, you really not gonna tell people you have multiple offers? And it's like, well, I didn't want to tell the terms. Well, then counter out the terms, but tell people you have multiple offers, right? It's very, very important. Okay. Disclosure of licensing, right? Seller and buyer understand that the buyer or the seller is a licensed real estate agent in the state of Arizona and is acting as a principal in this agreement. Must be disclosed. Why is that? Who says that?
The commissioner's law.
Commissioner's
Administrative.
rules, right? You must disclose. Why must you disclose that?
Because you have superior knowledge.
You have, not necessarily, but yes, you have superior knowledge. According to the Department of Real Estate, you have superior knowledge.
And held to the highest. Okay.
You are held to a higher standard. That is correct. So if you've not disclosed this and something goes awry, guess who is going to have the first check against them in the process from a court? You are.
And I chuckle because I just had a closing where my buyer had his license revoked for multiple contracts, not disclosing he was an agent. Between like 2020 and 2022. And the courts told him once, he didn't follow, and so they took it away.
So it is a real thing, folks. Please disclose that. It will get caught on our end. Heather's gonna go move there. We're not, our lights are going out on us. Okay, termite statement. Now, I've not seen this put in there in a long time. I did use this for many, many years. I don't know why we don't put it in anymore. Mostly, I think because we just negotiate it. Nobody seems to argue about it, but in the event that the termite inspection shows evidence of infestation, seller agrees to treat the infestation and replace any damage. Seller shall also provide buyer a 1-year termite treatment warranty at close of escrow. I think mostly we negotiate this as a part of the inspection period, but there were times where, again, when there were certain things that were required that had to be done in the inspection period, we would add this to make sure that this wasn't a negotiating arm, that they're like, we have to do all these other things. We're not doing that. Oftentimes this is a requirement of a loan. If your termite report is going to title, they must have you sign off on that, and they must provide it to the lender. If it's delivered to them. Is that?
I
No.
don't see termite reports anymore.
Yeah, so don't
It
send
just
them
goes
to
the
termite.
lender.
Oh, it goes,
Like, if the lender requires it.
Yes.
this is
Oh,
one
goes
we
to the lender?
rarely see it.
okay.
VA, it's required.
It is required on a VA loan. Okay. We used to have them sent to title because the seller or the buyer wanted to pay for them at close. I don't know. It was very weird. So personal property for sale. Let me ask you this. What does your license allow you to do?
Sell real estate.
Sell real estate, real property.
Mhm.
Does it say anywhere in there that you sell personal property? Okay,
Just so we can appraise the value of it.
so you can appraise the value. There you go. Thank you, Jason. No. No. So, and part of the problem, obviously here, we're in the Paradise Valley office. We get plenty of properties in this area in Scottsdale PV that have personal belongings in them. And these are not little, they're not Target couches, IKEA. I mean, you're talking beautiful furniture. The problem with if there is a loan and it gets added into your purchase contract, the appraiser, who I'm sure has a license to appraise furniture and personal property, they can put whatever number they deem that they feel that piece of furniture is worth, and it can really mess up your appraisal. So if there's a loan, please, whatever you do, do not ever have personal property in the purchase contract. This is the way to make sure it's outside. Furniture and other personal property shall be negotiated outside of this contract at a price mutually agreed upon by both parties as evidenced by a separate bill of sale. Now, I have heard and seen agents that have negotiated the personal property as in lieu of repairs. Fine, I don't care because that's on a Binzer. It's not going to a lender. But again, it needs to be on a separate bill of sale that is not going to the lender. Does that make sense? And if you want to put in the Binzer that seller agrees to provide the following list of items in lieu of making these repairs and the buyer agrees to it, I don't care, right? But don't put it in where it could be a part of that appraisal and could tank your entire thing when the appraisal comes through and you're, I don't know, $500,000 off. Like literally, folks, some of the stuff I've seen in some of these properties is pretty crazy, right? So be careful with that. What's the other thing I'm gonna say? Please, on the personal bill of sale, best to have your clients do it. Go online, seek personal bill of sale. Bill of sale does need to say it's contingent on the property closing. That's fine. Please define what it is. The number of times I've seen all contents in the home. That is the fastest way for you all of commissionectomy. Agent not in our office, dealt with showing a property prior to the home actually going on the market. It went on the market the next day, but somebody said, oh, no, we have to go see it today. Let them in that day. The seller was literally packing up the trucks. They went through the home. Rest of the home got packed up. The bill of sale said the outdoor pots. No numbers, no descriptions. Buyer saw those pots. Seller, by the time they saw the offer, was on a plane. Those pots were in a truck across the country, right? Comes to closing, buyer says, where are my pots? Guess who went to buy some pots? The agent.
The buyer.
The buyer agent went to go buy some pots. If you get suckered into writing this stuff, you better protect yourself. Otherwise, let them deal with it. They don't want to write it down. You had nothing to do with it, right? You start writing that stuff down and passing it back and forth. Guess who they're going to come to resolve the conflict?
And where it says outside of this contract, be the facilitator of the check. We cannot pass a check from buyer to seller.
I thought that was that blank envelope that you got handed.
That nondescript.
Nondescript envelope that was sealed.
So if the list is in Binzer, do you still have to provide a bill of sale? I mean, does the seller and buyer still have to have?
You don't, but I mean, there is room on the Binzer to do that. I recommend using page 2. I did see somebody that had actually written it on page 1 and it had shrunk down to this teeny tiny little, I'm like, guys, there's another page here. Like it literally, I was like, larger, can I see this? And actually this came across my desk this week. So, but yeah, you can. I would recommend you just say in lieu of see the thing because, well, I guess it doesn't convey if the deal doesn't go through. So yeah, that's fine. So I like that, that it's contingent, making sure that contingency language is there, right? You don't want to sell the furniture and then not sell the house. That would be a problem. So buyer agrees, this is LSU requirement. You could add this. Buyer agrees to provide seller an LSU every Friday by 12 noon. Who is responsible for the LSU?
Then,
Really?
The buyer.
The buyer agent is?
Well, I mean, the buyer, but
we don't know.
Let me throw
I
it.
mean, the buyer getting a loan, but you have to kind of.
Who is a party of the contract?
Oh,
Buyer and seller. So who's responsible for providing the LSU? Buyer. Is the lender a party to the contract? No. And if the lender says, I don't use the LSU form, can you still provide an LSU? Sure. Because who's responsible for it? the buyer. Hand it to your buyer. Tell them to fill it out. Tell them to call their lender and fill it out with their lender's help. Get the buyer to sign it.
So it doesn't need to be signed by lender.
If they say they won't do it, it doesn't have to be signed by the lender. The buyer has to deliver it. But the buyer better be asking whether or not those things are done or not. Right? They called for appraisal, if they paid for the appraisal. I mean, a lot of the stuff, the buyer knows where they are because they're processing through the loan process. So, but you can ask for this if you as a seller want that update every Friday, right? Okay. Final loan approval, right? Contrary to section 2C of the purchase contract, the buyer shall have final loan approval with no prior to doc conditions at least 7 days prior to close of escrow. Kind of a nice idea. It happens. I think this would be used if you had a long escrow, and the buyer was doing something, they needed the extra time in the property, but they needed their loan approved. The seller's like, fine, you can stay, you can hold up, wait another week to close, but you need to get me loan approval. You want to do a 60-day close. I need to know your loan approval's done in whatever this 53 days, right? So I think that would be where it would be most likely used. Title's laughing because many lenders can't make their regular deadline. To try and make them do a deadline 7 days prior is tough. But by the way, folks, I don't know if you're aware of this, but when you put a date in that contract, that's what the lender works off of. So if you start playing around when close of escrow is and you're not alerting your lender, everything in their pipeline is based on that date. So if a week prior you change that date and bump it backwards, you better be talking to your lenders, because the processor and underwriters, it's already slotted in with where in sequence that loan is being processed, right? So you all of a sudden change the deadline for them. They don't necessarily move they're not very flexible, right? And again, this is not your loan officer. This is the whole back end of the processing of that loan. So yeah, be careful with that. All right, adding a buyer to the contract. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this has been just a pain in my neck for the last 2 years. I keep getting contracts that say, John Smith is a buyer. Bleep. We just added John Smith to the contract. Okay. Depend John Smith. Like, I had a counter offer the other day that added buyers. Did I care about that? No, because it's at contract acceptance per time, right? Nothing else has happened, right? That's just like you had 3 names to begin with. The counter offer, it wasn't accepted until they were a part of the contract. But if you've done inspections, if you've had loan status updates, if you've had all these things occur, and all of a sudden, the lender says, well, add the wife to the contract. Okay. Wife hasn't been there. Wife hasn't seen it. Is the wife agreeing to all the terms and conditions? Has she received a copy of all that stuff? What is to say later on? She's to say, well, I didn't know that the roof was bad. Nobody told me. Like, how dare you, right? That opens up all sorts of things. So insert name is hereby added as a buyer to the purchase contract and all other related documents. This, yes. It would be all of the contract. Everything that went to the other side, you would need to have something on your side for our internal documents, because it wouldn't add it to those that are between the broker and the buyer, right? So if there's something specific on that end, especially on the selling side, there are things on that side. I'd have to think about it on the buyer side, but buyer's name, right, acknowledges receipt of all previously signed documents and agrees to proceed with the terms and conditions contained therein. Who's responsible for getting them those documents? Buyer's agent. So if you're the buyer's agent, should you perhaps have an email that is sending them all those documents?
Better say that email.
you better save that email. I'd be copying that email into SkySlope. Hi, John. Here's all the documents. I want to make sure you have a copy of all these before you sign this addendum, right? Because you're the one responsible for that. Because what are they going to say if something comes up later? I never got those documents. They didn't give them to me. They just told me to sign this. That's on you. So please make sure you're doing that. And this is why, and I love it, it's not our title, but lenders often say, oh, just add somebody, you know, and I get told, well, that's all title needed. Well, if you ask title, what do you need? They're going to say, well, we just need the name. That's all they do need. It isn't what we need. It isn't what the client needs. It's not what the purchase contract needs.
I need that too, though. I need the wording that
You-
the new buyer is bound by the new contract.
Well, that's good.
Has received everything and is
Yeah.
confirming that they're comfortable with that. and should proceed.
I just had a lender last week say, well, the buyer wants to take title in his trust. When the contract's written individual, all my opening documents are individual, and we're a day before closing. I've already gotten my deed signed by the seller with the buyer as an individual, so. Sorry, the day before closing is not when I need to know that.
Did you present them?
We did, yeah, and I did a courtesy deed after the fact, but.
So I don't know how many heard that. She did a courtesy deed after the fact to record it into the trust, right? So that's how that kind of works. But you can't change things, you know, literally a day or two before. For those that don't know, the seller often signs a week, 2 weeks. I mean, if they're leaving town, title will get them signed. They're done, right? You start changing the name or adding names, seller all of a sudden has to be found and sign those. And if they're in another country, they've got to find a consulate to get it signed. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. So please be aware of that and talk to people before you go, yeah, that's no problem. We can do that. Okay, so HOA violations. Whoops, I guess I should hit the next thing. So seller shall be solely responsible for the correction of any HOA violations and shall complete any corrections at least 3 days prior to close of escrow. You could add this if when you were walking through, you're like, huh, boy, that paint on that wall outside the house looks pretty bad. Wonder if that's going to be an HOA violation. Or there are no trees in front of the house, and every other house has 2 trees in front of the house, and this has no trees. By the way, those are HOA violations. You can see where the hole was that the tree used to be, and it's gone, right? That could be an HOA violation. There have to be a certain number of trees in the front, X number of bushes, depending on your HOA. So if you want to put that in there, you can throw that in there. They're like, yeah, we don't have any violations. Then you get the lovely HOA notice that says your wall has to be painted, trees have to be planted, you know, trim is the wrong color, blah, blah, blah. So lots of different things can come up. Okay. MLS removal to reset days on market. Now, we are not talking ARMLS rules here. We are talking what we are telling you to put on a listing contract addendum. Should you want to reset your days on market? So this has come up recently a lot. It's summertime. People are frustrated. They want to take their listings off the market. Are you going to cancel the listing or are you going to cancel it being on ARMLS? It's your listing, folks. Whether or not you're advertising on ARMLS or not is your seller's decision, not ARMLS's. Okay? So the property should be placed in expired status in MLS on blank date for the purpose of resetting the days on market clock. All other listing terms per the ER date, whatever the date was, shall remain in effect, and the property should be relisted as active in ARMLS on blank date. Seller is aware that the listing will not be marketed to the public, right? Sign has to come down, folks. Sign cannot be out there, can't be marketed to the public, nor to any participating MLS brokers while in expired status. Now, also alert your seller, they're going to receive all those lovely calls. I can sell your property. I've got the perfect buyer for you. Funny they didn't have it the day before, but they do have it now. because it's amazing, right? That's what they're doing. But it is a way to take it off for that 45 days. You do not cancel your contract. And by the way, I don't know how many people realize we have the old sold change form, which still can be used. The sold change form is an ARMLS document. When you are changing your listing contract with your seller, that is a listing contract addendum modification. Use the listing contract to change the listing, okay? The ER. If all you're doing is changing, I don't know, you're just extending the expiration date, you can use the sold change form, although I prefer that on the listing contract addendum. Let's say you're changing that there is now a loft. You forgot to put in a loft. Fine, do that on the sold change form, right? If you cancel or expire on your sold change form, our offices are going to assume you are canceling the whole thing because you said cancel, nothing else was listed. You didn't have this language, right? This would go in the listing contract addendum. There's no place on the sold change form to put this. Does that make sense? So defer to the listing contract addendum unless it's some little small thing that you're doing specific to ARMLS, not your listing, okay? We still got a few more. Strategic price reductions. So, this is for listing contracts. Now, you guys, a lot of you are not used to the fact that properties used to sit on the market for 6 months. So we used to create strategic price reductions that in the event that the property does not have an accepted offer by blank date, the list price shall be reduced by blank amount. Additional reduction shall occur every 14 days thereafter until an offer is received and accepted. This is a way to communicate and coordinate with a seller that you're going to have regular price reductions every 2 weeks, right? If you're not getting an offer. Now, right now, I'm not sure if I would still do this, but it is there and can be used. Does not, you choose the amount and you can choose the timing. It doesn't have to be 14 days. It can be 7 days. It can be 10 days, right? The reason they're doing it every 14 is it's probably dropping every Wednesday or Thursday. So it's ready for weekend activity. But that's probably why that's in there. Okay. Buyer, broker, increased compensation on employment addendum. So remember, we have a buyer broker, the buyer tenant employment agreement addendum. If you're being paid more than what your BBA reflects, you and your buyer must sign the employment agreement addendum with the following verbiage on lines 13 through 15. This is directly from Realty One Group's legal counsel. This is our attorney's wording that he wants us to add because the lawsuit said you could not accept any more than what was written in the contract. So our attorney is allowing you to increase this, but is requiring that you get your buyer to acknowledge something. It says buyer and buyer broker hereby agree to increase buyer broker compensation to blank % of the purchase price or blank dollars. Buyer acknowledges that an increase in buyer broker compensation may eliminate any credit potentially owed to the buyer, right? To buyer, as referenced on lines 41 to 43 of the buyer broker agreement. If you're getting this signed, you better be reading this and discussing this with your client, right? They need to know that that is why you're getting them to sign the increase with this language on there. They understand that whatever, X% could have been their money. Now, if you're doing new home sales, oftentimes the buyer can't collect anything more. Oftentimes that's when we see this increase is because the buyer's limited from what the builder's already offering. They will not give the buyer anything more. So the buyer's not going to get it anyway. But if it's not that scenario, the buyer has to acknowledge, nope, I'm fine. I don't want that extra XYZ dollars. I want you to have it. You've been amazing, right? It's fine, but you need to make sure you go through that. Okay. Just a few more here. Clause for the ER, only if the seller opts out to offer upfront compensation as opposed to negotiating. This, we still have some agents that want the seller to state the seller is providing blank percent or blank dollars on this transaction. These are Leah's words. As a reminder, this is not my recommended method. I 100% second that. I would stick to keeping it 100% negotiable in the purchase contract. However, if you feel the seller wants this, then seller wishes to offer buyer broker compensation, the amount of blank percent of full purchase price or blank dollars. This is separate from and in addition to the listing broker compensation set forth on line 46 of this agreement. Seller further authorizes and instructs listing broker to communicate this offer of compensation to prospective buyer brokers and request they submit the seller compensation addendum accordingly. And because of that, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's say it says 2.5%. Then that is telling the buyer broker to write the seller compensation addendum at 2.5%. Now, can they ask for 3? Of course, they can ask for 3. The seller is saying, this is what I'm paying. Okay. So it's up to them, but I still recommend that you keep it negotiable, that it depends on what that offer is, right? And here's the thing, right? So you've got a listing at $700,000. The offer is $610,000 and they're asking for 3%. How likely is the seller going to pay that 3% at $90,000 below list price, right? Do you see that the difference is, wait a minute, why am I paying all of that when you are driving that purchase price all the way down? Let the buyer pay it. Buyer wants this price. Buyer can pay their own broker, right? That's why it's negotiable. Let the contract work. Okay. AAR purchase contract is a counteroffer for an unrepresented buyer's offer. This goes on lines 344 plus 344 on. Okay, so I will be going over this later this month. Next month. Unrepresented buyer offers. We are now recommending that what you do is that the seller actually writes the purchase contract and sends it as a counteroffer for an unrepresented buyer's offer. I.e., if the buyer has written something out on a piece of paper, I, Joe, want to buy this address for this price, this time frame, blah, blah, blah. You would use this to counter on the purchase contract. This purchase contract serves as a counteroffer to the offer terms, right? Not offer contract, the offer terms presented by the unrepresented buyer on blank date. You may want to consider using additional clause addendum and or drafting language into the PC that removes contingencies for the buyer, financing, appraisal, etc. That is up to your seller, but you don't have to keep those contingencies if you don't want to. That's up to the seller to say, yeah, I'm not offering those. They can do that. And believe it or not, it is 11:01. I have 2 more that are from me. So I'm going to be really quick. I recommend you get your ER when you meet with that seller. Don't wait. If they tell you, yeah, I just wanted to talk to you, I'm not going to list for another few months, get the ER. Now, that does cause a problem. And what it is that you're taking the ER, it's January, you're taking the ER, they're not listing it till May. You need to move that start date. You don't want, when you get it started in May, you don't want to list that you had it in January. Now, owner instructs broker to modify the ARMLS start date to match the date the listing is put into active or coming soon, whichever is sooner. Now, please note, this is not for marketing for 5 months of private listing periods. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about, just getting that signed. I have signed listings literally in January. We did not go on the market till May. Isn't it funny though? I signed that in January. I swear a week later, they called me and said, yeah, somebody knocked on the door. They wanted to buy my house. I told them I had it listed. So here's their information, which is of course what I told the seller. Somebody knocks on the door, give them my card, right? It's funny how all of a sudden somebody decides they want to sell, and all of a sudden the flyers, the calls, the knocks on the door, you meet with somebody, get that ER signed, right? Get it signed. Because guess what? You have the listing. They can't all of a sudden, oh, Melissa, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I had somebody knock on the door. They offered me cash and I just thought it was the best thing I sold last week. And then you find out they sold for some ridiculously low amount. And you're like, why didn't you let me represent you? That was what we talked about, right? So please do that. The last one I have is, look, our Rock Title listing templates. If you did not know, Rock Title offers 50% off the escrow fees with Rock Title. You can add this to your listing templates so it goes in your ER that the seller instructs the owner to add this language into in MLS description, right? Please consider Rock Title. I've got Roberta Tyndall here. Both buyer and seller receive 50% off the escrow fees with Rock Title. And I also have Art's information here. You can have alternating ones. You can have both of it. But just so you have the information for both of our Rock Title agents upstairs, our escrow officers. I've had people argue over $100 on something. I'm like, and you didn't take our title discount when you could have saved $500 for your client? Really? Come on, folks. So please make sure that they understand that that is 50% off the escrow fee for both buyer and seller. Any last comments before I get this wrapped up?
No, thank you so much for including me on your.
Well, it's a clause. I do add. So any questions from folks online? That was my last thing there. Boy, I got a lot of folks here. Any-
I have a quick question. This is Coey.
Hi.
Hi. Is the FERPTA, is that identified in the title commitment?
No. No, the title commitment is only disclosing matters of record. A foreign seller is not recorded anywhere disclosing that they're foreign.
So if they're Canadian and they have a property here and they go to sell and you don't find that out until closing?
Somebody has to tell me.
Yeah, but it's in the contract that they are to disclose that. The
Right,
contract,
but if you're the buyer and you're looking to buy a house that's being sold by a Canadian and you're not aware that it's FERPTA.
It should be in the MLS.
Yeah, but the seller didn't put it in the listing, is what I'm saying. The seller got it wrong.
The seller and the listing agent, so how would you handle that?
If I don't know, I don't know.
Yeah, and buyer doesn't know either, and you.
Right. Typically
Not
though,
bad,
up
but-
front upon opening, we get buyer and seller contact information. And at that point, if it's a Canadian, say,
address.
yeah, address, phone number, that will disclose. Plus when we, our system automatically sends an email out to both parties, buyer and seller, to complete information. So at that point, we're asking for their address. So they would put in a Canadian address, hopefully.
So there's no record anywhere of when a non-citizen buys property here?
The
That's not-
only thing, and it's not recorded, it's not public record, but the only thing we might catch in escrow is the tax bill mailing address, if they're having the tax bill sent to a foreign country. If they're utilizing a US address, I would have no knowledge it's a foreign seller. And it is a little bit of a lengthy process. So if it's not disclosed up front, it can delay closing because we need some supporting documentation.
Okay.
Any other questions? You guys have a great Tuesday and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.